Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the last segment on today's show of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, and it should be yet another good one. We are transitioning from the NFL Week 1 betting preview to the Week 2 betting preview of what should be a fascinating Week 2 in college football. 3 big games, even 4 big games that we could touch upon in terms of betting previews. Interesting storylines as well that we're going to be touching upon as we look ahead to tomorrow's fascinating slate of games. And, Week 2 always tells the story of a college football team, no matter who you're playing. This is the week where we really start to understand who's for real and who's not. There are some teams that are ambitious scheduling, as we'll see as we go through the 3 games I want to highlight. But there are some teams who are still tuning up as well. So without further ado, let us jump right into our college football betting preview, starting off with the biggest game of the weekend, as Big Bad Texas heads up to Ann Arbor, the big house, to take on the defending national champion, Michigan Wolverines. Fascinating game, fascinating storylines. Reminds me as a Texas Longhorns fan of last year's game, Week 2, where Texas went into Alabama, got a statement win. And the reason why I mentioned ambitious scheduling is because Texas takes advantage of this. Texas plays the long game in terms of scheduling games early on in the season where maybe they can catch a team off guard and hope that it holds up as the season goes on and as that team themselves improves. It really showed last year when they went into Jordan-Hare Stadium, went into Tuscaloosa, beat Bama, and knew that Bama were good enough to improve and maintain a level of success, and they were in the playoffs because they had to honor that head-to-head win after Alabama upset the odds and beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. So that's what this game is looking like. Not the biggest games on either of these teams' schedules, though, but it's still an interesting game to see. Right now, on the road, Texas is actually favored, giving 3.5 points to Michigan. The money line is minus 178. The over-under, 48.5 in terms of points. And the big storyline lays in the quarterback for Texas, Quinn Ewers. Can he do what he did last year against Alabama, where he had perhaps his best game in a Texas uniform, and impress scouts even further with his ability to show that he truly has matured and can truly stay consistent as he goes to the NFL next year? And against a Michigan defense that has a lot of talent, but maybe not as much talent as defenses past for Michigan, they still have Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham up front, and Will Johnson, perhaps the best cornerback in college football, on the back end. But the reason why I'm still confident in saying that Texas should win this game, maybe not as handily as people think, is because when I look at last week's game against Colorado State or Texas, and this is definitely kind of not necessarily the best information to give you because it was Colorado State, and they should have won the game handily. What I was impressed about with Quinn Ewers was the fact that all of his touchdown passes came in the red zone, which is what Texas kind of struggled with last year. Diversity in the red zone when they got there. Because Quinn Ewers, a lot of people will agree that one of his best assets is his deep ball. Breaking down the defense vertically. Threatening the defense vertically. It was what he did last year against Alabama. This year, though, breaking in a much different wide receiver core than he had with Texas last year, where he had the speed of Xavier Worthy, the intelligence and downfield intelligence, most importantly, of A.D. Mitchell, and the brilliant seam route running from Natavion Sanders. Now it's Isaiah Bond, fantastic route runner, fantastic red zone threat. Matthew Golden, probably the speedster in this offense, but can still run a solid route. And Silas Bolden, who would perhaps profile as the vertical threat. So it's going to be interesting to see if Quinn Ewers and Texas offense gets a lot of opportunities in the red zone, how they go up and match up against this defense. That's where I'm more excited. In terms of Michigan, I think the X factor is a guy a lot of people are underestimating, and that is tight end Colson Loveland, because They're going to try to win this game on the ground. They're going to try to grind Texas defense down. By the way, Michigan's offense shouldn't underestimate Texas defense. Texas defense is more than capable of putting their offense in advantageous situations. But at the end of the day, Michigan's offense is going to try and tire out this Texas defense by grinding the ball on the ground. But you're going to need some kind of outlet if you're either Davis Warren or Alex Orji to pass the football. And Colson Loveland is your main hope at the receiver position to do just that. Who knows? Maybe Sharon Moore will try and keep up with Texas, and maybe he'll have Davis Warren throw the ball more vertically down the field. But at the end of the day, I think that in terms of Michigan's game plan, they need to think about a contingency plan if the run game isn't working. And Colson Loveland seems like the perfect outlet. But at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to Texas's red zone offense, Michigan's game plan, and Quinn Ewers. If Texas' red zone offense is effective, if they can even get to the red zone and score from that vantage point, then they're already ahead of the game. If Michigan's game plan is going to be ground and pound on the ground, do they have an outlet in third and long, third and short situations as a receiving option? And then Quinn Ewers, can he do it again? Those questions are going to need to be answered in order for me to give you. But that being said, I'm taking Texas. I think they'll cover, and I think the over should hit because I think Texas's game plan of making this a shootout will be the predominant one. I think that I'm more confident in just taking Texas outright than saying that this game will hit any over. But transitioning to the next game on the docket this week in Colorado at Nebraska. Now, if this was the 1990s, when both of these teams were consistently in the AP top 10, this game probably would have meant a little bit more, but it's still a very exciting game because of the many different storylines here. Nebraska's at home in Lincoln, and they are giving 6.5 points. Money line minus 200, over under an impressive 56.5. Now, I think this is all going to come down to the quarterback battle because both of these quarterbacks are very solid. In redshirt freshman Dylan Raiola, who last week had a fantastic performance, 19-27, 288, 2 TDs, and Isaiah Nair, who was of Wyoming, had injury problems at Texas, fame, coming in, consistent transfer, immediately developing that rapport. They have a solid foundation in offense. Their O-line is great. Their D-line is pretty consistent as well. On Colorado's side, you perhaps have the best 3 players in this game in Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, and Jimmy Horn. So you just got to get all 3 of those guys going. They perhaps are lacking in terms of offensive line depth at the moment. Their defense should be steadily improved at this point. But I think that this game is going to be a shootout, and it's going to come down to which quarterback can stay the course, which quarterback can rely on this wide receiving core. I'm not confident that Nebraska will cover the spread, but I actually think that they'll win this game. It's at Lincoln. There's a sense of rejuvenation in the system. Matt Rule is responsible for a lot of success at the college level in terms of the second-year jump. Did it with Temple, did it with Baylor, and in Dylan Raiola, he has a confident young quarterback who has an experienced receiving core and has a lot of depth in his team that he can trust. So at the end of the day, I'm taking Nebraska not to cover the spread, and I'm taking the under here. So it's going to be an interesting game. I think it's going to be an exciting game, but that's the only advice I can give you. It doesn't necessarily mean much, like I said, but it's still exciting game to contemplate. And the last game that we're going to cover here on today's show, Iowa State versus Iowa, the Cy-Hawk rivalry. And this is an interesting one because when I think about both of these teams, I think about their defenses more than I do their offenses this season. That being said, Iowa really impressed me in the second half of their game against FCS Illinois State, who was predicted to be one of the better FCS teams in the nation. They are still an FCS team, though. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is this is going to be a very physical game. Whatever you get, like an in-state rivalry, it's always going to be physical. It's almost like a divisional game in the NFL. Both these teams not even in the same conference, but they are still going to be very physical with each other. That being said, both of these quarterbacks have interesting profile because Rocco Becht, very underrated quarterback out of Iowa State, had an interesting season last year, decent season last year, and Cade McNamara, well, he played in a Big Ten championship game with Michigan, and he brings that experience to Iowa. Looked pretty good last week, and if he can stay healthy, who knows what the Iowa Hawkeye season will look like, especially on offense as they try to improve there. But I think this game will come down to which defense is better, and Iowa State, as someone who has watched a lot of Big 12 football, as a Texas fan, Iowa State's defense has to be one of the most physical and dominant and hard to score against in the entire Big 12, and that's not a joke. So I think this game can be dragged to Iowa State's advantage. Thus, I'm not taking Iowa in the points here. I'm taking Iowa State outright. The over-under, yeah, it's a moot point at this point because the joke is going to be this game is going to be very low scoring. But I still think these offenses have a shot. But I will take the ISU money line here as well. Should be a good game. Should be a fantastic week. Let me know what you think about this week in college football in the comments. But that will just about do it for the show and the week here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in to today's show. Thank you all for your comments. Consider liking, following, and subscribing to this show and the network as a whole. Also, make yourselves available to the features YouTube has to offer, whether it be through Super Chat, Super Thanks, or Super Stickers. Anything you do for the show, the network, me and my fellow podcasters are greatly appreciated. That being said, I've been Chris Shepard. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We'll be back on Monday, same time as usual, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you all for tuning in for a week. I'm out.